Have you ever worked for a boss like Michael Scott? Story 1. This was my first boss in America when I was 21. He was Asian American. I had never seen The Office but noted the absurdity. He would get free potato chips from a guy in a company truck and would stuff his cheeks in the middle of telling me what to do. He always offered some. He fired a coworker for screaming some racist stuff at me by just yanking her out the door. He called another coworker a cub or a baby lion because she was tiny with wild, unruly hair, and he would do a small mini roar whenever she was about to report for her shift or when I mentioned her name. He ran around the place with a wig on his head, imitating me. He brought his daughter to work and gave her piggyback rides in the office and would ask me to take videos. He would talk to black people in a black way. He would say, "What's up, shorty?" to the ladies and "What's poppin'?" He called the guys Tyrone and would say stuff in the most convincing black voice. It was actually pretty good. He would ask me to teach him random Arabic words so he could yell them sporadically in the middle of the day. He always got the accent right. He had an open door policy and would do shots in his office. He started a small chicken farm in the back of the building and would give out whole chickens to the staff. He had me and a coworker try to slaughter one once. I couldn't and nicked it just a little bit and shrieked, spraying all three of us with blood. We received a visit from the city people to tell him he couldn't keep chickens in back. He was rounding the main floor with a small basket of freshly laid eggs just as they were asking for him. He did the chicken farm again the next summer, this time with a small garden growing squash, cucumber, corn, etc. to disguise the chicken coop. He happily gave out vegetables along with the chicken. He would be extremely proud of taking home a tray of his own eggs to his children and ate 2 fresh eggs every morning. He brought a walk to work to deep fry sausages in and sometimes made lunch in the back. The entire floor would smell like food and he would round us all, 3 of us, to his office to eat. He would regularly fall asleep under his desk. The snoring was so loud you could hear it in the front. Once a client asked what that noise was and I said it was just the plumbing. He woke up after his naps looking puffy but acting as if nothing happened and would immediately go next door for a cherry coke. He would constantly eat hard candy to stay awake during the day. He ate too many edibles at a party I hosted once and passed out. He told me to hire someone, but when he saw the girl, he made a comical facial expression with his eyebrows raised and eyes big. Think Ken Jeong, because she was having trouble fitting into her chair. She was a bigger girl. He took away chairs the next day because they encouraged us not to concentrate on the client. The girl was a no-call no-show the following week. He had a love-hate relationship with a groundhog not long into his farming venture, but never caught the guy. Once, he threw a cricket at me from the very opposite end of the office floor. He and another coworker kept such straight faces that I finally convinced myself the cricket flung itself at me. I watched the cameras at the end of the day only to see them do it. I'm still traumatized. He has an office to this day full of the weirdest collection of things. A few feathers from favorite chickens of his that he had since consumed, all named and dated, a rabbit paw someone gave him, a goat's hoof, a framed quote I told him, which was told to me by a very high homeless person, and I don't remember the rest. It's just an odd place to go into. He had a hard time growing a beard and would ask me what I thought of the progress of his soup taster. He was the nicest boss I've ever had. Well, meaning if a little racially insensitive, all while being fascinated by other people's cultures. He would buy different cuisines for us to try each week. He gave bonuses because he knew the job didn't pay much, so that was always a nice surprise. He paid my former coworker when she had to stay home all through her husband's COVID. Also, he loves llamas, alpacas, and baby goats, and when I showed him how to use Reddit, he would almost always send me an alpaca photo. I still get a photo now and then. Also, 3 years after leaving, he still sends me photos of his illegal farm and recently asked me to post his cucumbers on Reddit. Honestly, he sounds great. Do you still see him at all? I saw him last February before the pandemic, and he was running around after the groundhog. Your boss had many Michael Scott-like behaviors, but overall it seems like he was a genuinely good person to work for, except for involving you in the chicken slaughter. I would have drawn the line there. Story 2. My boss is certainly Michael Scott-esque. When I first started, I was essentially Pam, since I was both a receptionist and his assistant to some extent. My favorite story was back when we were prepping for a conference. Some context, he's terrible with the English language in general and will mangle phrases and descriptions to no end. So on a group call, he kept talking about wanting a golden hamster ball to do giveaways with. He was raving about how great it would be spinning around while people walked by. All the while, everyone on the call was just sitting in confused silence. By that point, however, I had become so good at decoding his nonsense that I knew he was referring to a gold raffle cage and sent him an image privately asking if it was what he was thinking. To this day, he still talks about the fact that I can read his mind and must be psychic, and he still refers to it as a hamster ball. All in all, he's a pretty nice guy and a solid boss. He hired me based on a gut feeling and has been decent to me ever since. I think I knew it would be a good fit when during the interview he tried to tell me about the 4 pillars of the company and forgot one. He told me later it was knowledge. I've watched The Office at least twice, but I feel like you just described an episode that I missed. You gotta love a boss who doesn't even remember the company's pillars. He sounds like a funny and interesting man to have as a boss. Story 3. I used Michael Scott as a reference point for an old boss of mine from the moment I started working there. He made Chewbacca noises on the regular because one of my coworkers' names sort of vaguely sounded like Chewbacca. It didn't. He used voice-to-text extremely loudly in his office for no reason to send really personal messages. He got really excited and wore a specific vest anytime we had after-work outings scheduled. He shouted the same, like, 7 references to old movies and extremely awkward hip-hop song quotes 100 times a day. He insisted on greeting all our international coworkers very loudly in their native languages. They all speak perfect English, of course, looking around for approval afterward, and then fully giggling at everyone's French accents on conference calls. He also told me a lot about an improv show he did for a full year after it happened. All that said, he had all the good parts too. He never hesitated to go to the mat for any of us, whether we deserved it or not. He gave really sage business advice and great examples of how to face challenges out of absolutely nowhere. And he came to every community play I did in the 4 years I worked for him, and told everyone else in the office how good I was in it for the following month and chastised them for not coming. When things really got serious or bad in my life, he couldn't have been more kind, helpful, and supportive. Honestly, probably the best boss I'll ever have. That's the most Scott-like boss I've seen yet. That thing about the voice-to-text is hilarious, even down to talking about improv. Are you absolutely certain your boss wasn't Michael Scott? Because he certainly embodies the spirit perfectly. Story 4. I have never worked for one myself, but my dad told me a story about his boss who was giving out awards to everyone in honor of how long they've worked there, and he would give speeches for each person. A woman employee received her award, and he gave a speech about the story of how she came to work there, and he said, "At first, I didn't want to hire her because she was so hot." My dad's not working there anymore, but I love that story, because I will never not picture Michael Scott giving Pam a Dundee and saying that about her. Not being hired for being too good-looking is a common form of prejudice no one talks about. I always thought that was a kind of lip service until I had a manager who would actively choose not to hire anyone more attractive than her. She was a solid okay in the looks department, so none of the new hires were above her on the ranks. This was actually brought to my attention by some of the women in the department who had been there a while. They thought it might be because it made her feel insecure to be around someone more attractive than her. They figured that by hiring unattractive women that she felt better by comparison. That might sound like a bit of a stretch, but with our boss's personality, it made perfect sense. The judgmental attitude and pettiness just lined up perfectly with how she is. I personally think Michael Scott would hire someone because they were attractive, but admitting this to the entire office while giving the employee an award is definitely a Michael move. Story 5. He held a meeting with our whole team, minus one person, to discuss that person being gay. We all knew for well over a year and never made a deal of it. So yes, bosses like Michael Scott are out there, and that is why the show is so funny to me. I can relate. Did he try to kiss him? No, the guy was on vacation, so our staff meeting was strategically moved when he was out of the office. Story 6. I literally had a boss who would stop us in the middle of our work and hold company-wide meetings, talking about 9/11 truther conspiracies and chemtrails. Mind you, we were a furniture-making company. He would get so caught up in his conspiracy theories that he forgot to order wood to make furniture one month. My boss has been doing this with us. I feel like she thinks it's her duty to keep us safe from COVID, which it partially is, but it turned into her and other coworkers talking about weird virus conspiracies. If you have an HR, talk to them. For the love of all things sane, if there are people over your boss, talk to them. My burden was the owner, so I could not. Story 7. I had one, and these are just a few quick stories. He asked me how much I weighed during my interview. One time, he was considering selling the company to a Japanese company, and while walking them around the building, he was heard saying, "We really bombed the hell out of you, huh?" He got on the intercom and interrupted everyone by yelling for someone to bring him the football team's schedule. I have video of him telling a really cringy joke during a sales meeting. You could see at least one person covering their face in embarrassment. Once, he told me to call his assistant and have her bring him a bag of coffee and his 5-pound dumbbell. He had a secret facelift. He was mysteriously gone for 3 weeks and came back with a beard. I ended up with a box of pictures from the 70s with an exotic dancer giving him a lap dance. In the conference room. Same furniture. One time I watched his business partner go down the potluck line, tasting everything with the same fork. At the end of the line, he stuck his used fork into the cake. I haven't eaten at a work buffet since. Honestly, these are just the ones I immediately remember. It was 5 years of this. I'm going to make a wild guess and say that the Japanese sales deal didn't go through. It did not. He ended up selling domestically, and I think I remember that company saying they'd never structure a deal like that again. He gave them hell. I cannot believe he said that to the potential Japanese buyers. That really is some tactless Michael Scott thing to say. Story 8. My boss used to carry around a backpack full of hammers, and if you fell asleep at your desk, he started banging a hammer on your desk until you woke up, and then he would autograph the hammer and give it to you as a gift. To be fair to your boss, is falling asleep at work common? I'd do it once, for a free hammer. Story 9. Worked with a genuine Michael Scott, that is, a nice, well-meaning person who just did some absurd things. We had kidnapping drills one day where we learned how to not be kidnapped. Notably, this was a regular boring office in a regular boring suburb. No reason why kidnapping would be on anybody's radar. He and several of the guys randomly broke out into a push-up contest. Again, white-collar office, middle-aged dudes in khakis. He couldn't remember the nationality of our Hispanic colleague. He tried to learn Spanish to make her feel more special when she returned from maternity leave. What he learned was not Spanish, and she was from Portugal. She knew like 5 words of Spanish. He disappeared for 4 days. No call, no email. He wouldn't respond to any of our attempts to reach him. Finally, someone drove out to his house to make sure he was alive. He was. He'd just forgotten to tell us he was taking the week off and then lost his phone in a lake. There were many, many moments like these. Great boss. Genuinely cared about everyone in the company. Occasional moments of brilliance where he really got things done. But OMG, so many moments of ridiculousness. Kidnapping drills? Did he tell you to never go to a second location? No, we learned how to hold onto our desks and scream fire. Great plan if an unarmed kidnapper comes into our suburban office while we're at our desks. Probably not going to work so well if there isn't a desk to hang on to, or if he's armed, or if we're alone. But if that unarmed kidnapper comes in during the middle of the workday, we should all be set. Story 10. Mine had some aspects of Michael Scott, but the ones that are sad and pathetic and not funny. Here are a couple of examples. He called an all-staff meeting to announce his divorce. He then instructed our receptionist to lie to his soon-to-be ex-wife and deny he was in the office all the time. He was just so incompetent at his job. If a task was too big or complicated, he would just not do it. He wouldn't ask for help or anything. He'd just move on and leave the issue to fester. I would have to constantly monitor and follow up with him to get things done. That affected my job. His writing sounded like he used a thesaurus heavily, with tons of superfluous words clearly put in there to make him sound smart. When he was terminated, he kept the corporate laptop and cell phone. After several strongly worded letters requesting their return, he drove back to the office, parked on the edge of the road, a busy rural highway, and made his teenage son carry it all across the yard and parking lot to deliver them. I was eventually tasked by the big bosses to coordinate his termination. They then gave me his job plus my previous one. I can do both within a 40-hour week, no problem. How did he even get the job initially? My guess, the issue with Michael Scott and other similar bosses described in this thread is the Peter principle. It's a phenomenon where a person is competent at their job and gets promoted, but eventually finds themselves incompetent at the job that they're at. Your boss had all the incompetence of Michael Scott and none of the fun. Bummer. But at least you got his job. Story 11. My mom's boss was the head manager at an office job in suburbia. It had a pretty similar number of employees and functioned to the office in the show. He was in his late 40s at the time and invited himself to my mom's birthday party at our house one year. It was basically just my siblings and a few family friends meeting up to play cornhole and chat for a couple of hours. He showed up in pastel blue shorts, a pink polo, and flip-flops with a case of natural light. He got hammered by like 9 p.m. and started yelling at everyone. He saw a couple of our neighbors, some younger guys, drinking next door and took the liberty to invite them over. Eventually, he ended up in a wrestling match with one of the neighbors in the living room, which he finished by lifting the neighbor up into the air and body slamming him directly onto our coffee table. His final act of the evening was crapping his pants in the kitchen and passing out on the linoleum. At least he wasn't one of those bosses who doesn't give a crap. Obviously, by the end, he had given a crap. Unfortunately, it didn't make it very far. Story 12. I had a manager at my previous job that really tried his best to be everyone's BFF. He loved giving pep talks and thought he could raise our abysmal morale by being Mr. Positivity. Note, morale was low because we were always buried in work and paid crap. He'd crack jokes, randomly burst into song, and sneak up behind you to yell, "You're doing a great job!" Unfortunately, he was also super incompetent at his job. He relied heavily on a junior colleague for help with technical stuff. They practically did his whole job for him, and he spent days working on paperwork that should really only take an hour or two. If you had a problem, his answer was usually either to stare blankly at you until you left, or to say, "Think positive and it'll work itself out." The thing he did that I hated the most was whenever people would apply to work at the company, he'd print out the stack of resumes, sit at his desk, and read aloud all of the parts he found funny. He'd laugh at people for working at McDonald's or other fast food places. He loved finding grammar mistakes and making fun of them. If someone had a cringy objective statement, he'd guffaw over that too. This was all done loudly, and it was an open office, so you couldn't avoid hearing it. That definitely lowered morale too. Story 13. I had one for a year and it was awesome. If he would be in the middle of a story and the phone rang, he would literally say, "Let it go to voicemail." If a customer called 5 minutes before closing, he'd demand I let it ring and go to voicemail. He was late more often than I was. He frequently bought us coffees. He always took our side in customer disputes, and if a customer yelled at us or got abusive on the phone, he would call them back and get into an argument with them and tell them to order from someone else. He straight up told us that if weather conditions were bad, he didn't care how late we were, just that we were safe. Sometimes he would tell me on random days to take a 2-hour lunch. I was paid salary and didn't punch in or out. He was great, and he gave me so much free stuff. We used to call him Michael Scott behind his back. Unfortunately, the owners were a bit stricter. Myself and another coworker got fired and said boss got promoted. It was fun while it lasted. This is so wholesome to me. I don't know why, because it's rare these days to have a boss actually care about you as a person and not just an employee number. The way I got fired was brutal, and a few months later, even the HR manager who fired me got brutally fired. The owners spouted all kinds of crap about being all about families, but in the end, their actions showed otherwise. Story 14. Oh yes, here are some examples. He called the UPS delivery man Marshawn every time because he was African American, but his name was James. He dismissed my claims that one of our partners, the sister company's CEO, was harassing me because men say things like that and I should take it as a compliment. He would have the most useless meetings. He would bring pizza and beer for lunch and try to get us to stop and party with him even though we were slammed with deadlines. Our office was an open one, so we would be at our desks and he'd be drinking at 2 p.m., playing music 3 feet away from us while we tried to make phone calls. One day he came in angry and called a meeting. A colleague put candy on the table and he stopped mid-sentence in his rant because he got distracted by the shiny wrappers. He would constantly make white knight decisions even if that made work 10 times harder for us, and went directly against policy that he created. What are white knight decisions? Incredibly generous but not thinking of the consequences. Like the Scots Tots, we had strict rules for how we ran our program, non-profit, and if someone managed to reach him on the phone and cried or pleaded a bit, he would agree to anything because it made him look good and generous. His decisions would have consequences for everyone in the program, and he'd forget that he was the source of the situation. For instance, he once agreed to give someone unlimited time to pay for the services, but then every month I'd get raked over the coals as to why that specific individual had not paid. I sincerely hope that none of the white knight promises your boss made were as painful to watch unfold as Scott's Tots. Story 15. My boss was less entertaining than Michael, but we often compared him for the following examples. He only hired people he would have a beer with. He was grossly underqualified to manage, but he was good at sales, so got promoted. He made really awkward, distasteful jokes and comments. For example, he asked an employee if he and his twin brother shared a girlfriend. He was just really wasteful and held pointless meetings. Nobody knew how he spent his days. His assistant manager did all the heavy lifting, and he would wander around making conversations. He literally showed up to a meeting with his superiors having done zero preparation, and they kicked him out of the meeting. He actually got fired for calling COVID Kung Flu to a Chinese employee back in March. I think that would have to be the craziest. He worked there for 8 years, but had so many notes on his file, this was just the one that pushed it over the edge. He was underqualified to manage but got promoted. This is called the Peter Principle, and is very common. If you're good at your job, you get promoted out of it and into another job. If you're not good at your job, you stay there. Makes a lot of sense if you don't think about it. Story 16. He went to Germany and rented a car. He didn't know how to drive in Germany and hit 8 cars in the rental car lot. He asked me to use my company card to pay the insurance premium. I told him no. We had so many communication problems that HR recommended we have Monday morning one-on-ones. He never showed up for them. I kept a record. He complained to HR that we weren't having the meetings he wasn't showing up to. He told me that the woman who was stuck on a project with him could receive a form of gratis up to $500. She chose a PlayStation, and then when I was called on my company purchase, he wouldn't say that he specifically allowed the transaction and attempted to get me fired because he was tired of me always calling him on his crap. I handled his wife's resume and application to the DMV, his mortgage papers, his insurance papers, his whole family's passports, all things that went beyond my position's scope. HR stepped in to tell him to only have me do work-related tasks, and he told me to never talk to HR again. He's the boss and I'll do what he says. He was standing with his same level executive coworkers, all of whom I supported, and while the other 3 wished me good morning, he literally went out of his way to ignore me. The irony is that he volunteered me for a lot of stuff I excelled at, and I failed up while he failed out. Turns out the protection he got while his brother was CIO disappeared as soon as the brother left the company. He transferred out of IT and became engineering's problem before I left the company. Also, at a company Christmas party, he bet the department that we wouldn't climb the rock wall faster than him. He ended up severely spraining his ankle and withholding the $100. Also, another boss decided we needed to have a raffle to boost morale. I got an iPad and some gift cards. The boss who wanted to boost morale won the iPad and kept it. What? None of us could believe it. Is driving in Germany hard? I assume parking lot driving is not difficult. Also, how a boss doesn't exempt themselves from the staff morale booster is bonkers. He said that his foot got stuck. The reality is that this man was never without a screen in front of his face 24/7. Either it was inattention or he got a more powerful car than he could handle. It was clear to me his original story was not what really happened. Story 17. I had a short-term computer programming gig working for a guy named Art, who was a Michael Scott. He was a genuinely nice person, but was totally obnoxious to everyone around him. He had no squelch. Whatever thought came into his head came out of his mouth. It was in the days when you could smoke in your office, and he went through several packs a day. Meetings in his office were hellish. At one point, we had to travel to a branch location together. The company leased a 2-bedroom apartment in the branch town for HQ employees. This meant that during the 1-week trip, Art and I would literally be spending 24 hours a day together. As I was getting mentally prepared for the trip, I took solace in the fact that at least we would sit separately on the 3-hour plane flight. You could smoke on the plane then too, and Art was sure to be lighting up every 10 minutes. As we got to the gate, I said, "I'll see you when we land." "Oh, we're sitting together," said Art. "Art, I can't sit in smoking for a 3-hour flight." "Oh, I don't smoke on the plane. We have seats next to each other in non-smoking." My week in hell had begun. This is where you just have to put some headphones in and pretend you're going to sleep, and at least you were safe from the cigarette smoke for a short while. Story 18. I have been lucky and had fairly good bosses. My worst boss was at a large technology company. He was a network engineer that got promoted to management. He had no idea how to do the job, which was usually okay. He would just approve vacations and the like and let everyone do their job. The main annoyance was, he was a network engineer and I was a Windows Server engineer, so anytime the customers would ask us to do something impossible, or that would actively hurt them, he would leave me to defend our company's stance. If the network team had any pushback, he would would jump on and defend them and act as the point of contact he was supposed to be. He also didn't understand a lot of what I did, so his measurement of if I was doing a good job was if I was at my desk. The network team could work from home whenever they wanted to, but if I worked from home more than once in a 2-week period, he would send me emails letting me know how important it was to be in the office. I ended up getting fired for working from home when I was sick. I had a project due, so I was trying to get it done, got sick, faxed him the doctor's note saying I was allowed off for the rest of the week, and then logged in and started to work. He said since I was working, I had to be in the office. I ignored him. Then next Friday, he had me meet with him at 8 a.m. I showed up and HR was sitting there to walk me out. That said, the most Michael Scott thing he did is during the lead up to and through football season, he would have a team meeting the last 2 hours every Friday for fantasy football. If team members didn't want to play fantasy football, he said they would have to go back to work instead of just hanging out with everyone. I ended up just draft picking people from the Miami Dolphins so I could sit and talk with everyone. There were several other people that just randomly picked people and never traded, and one guy just went back to work and didn't attend any of the meetings. With those types of people, it's never the network, but somehow magically issues get resolved on the network. Despite losing a job, it sounded like a huge relief to be gone from them. It made me extremely depressed when it happened. 4 years on, I can see it was one of the best things to happen to me. I have anxiety problems, and that job was exacerbating them to the point I was barely able to function. My new job has less stress, less unpaid overtime, and I enjoy what I'm doing more. I'm also getting paid considerably better. It also made me reach out for help with my anxiety and depression, and I got help and built out my support system. Story 19. Man, I wish I could remember more about my old boss, but I've blocked most of it out. He told us he invented Apple computers before Steve Jobs, and that the computer he invented is still to this day more powerful than any other computer. He threw knives in the air and said if you can catch them, he'll give you money. This was apparently at a Christmas party. I wasn't there, but I believe it 100%. He came to work wearing nothing but leopard print underwear and a pink cowboy hat. He's like in his 70s. Unfortunately, I was there for that one. He was diagnosed with bipolar disorder, but not the bad kind, the kind that makes you super smart. He got drunk at work and gave alcohol to whoever would take it. He literally needs to be institutionalized, but he's rich, so he gets away with everything and everyone is scared of him. Poor people are crazy, rich people are eccentric. Story 20. So I worked for a carpet store in high school for about a year and a half. I ended up dating the daughter and learning that the mom/owner was mega abusive and stuff. I got fired when I helped my girlfriend move out, but that's a story for another time. The boss was literally insane and had all different antics. She had me go out on 2 busy days to her home and power wash around 200 square feet of her concrete. She wouldn't give family pay stubs, so they never knew how much they were getting paid, which is illegal in our state. She was really big into boating, and at one point considered having me and her daughter go to her house to wax her boat. She lacked any real friends because she was super up her own butt, so she just tried to do the hip things her daughters did. So when her daughter bought a pair of teal Vans, she bought the exact same pair and wore them. Got one compliment and kept repeating that one compliment for 3 weeks after it happened. She would eat an entire box of Peeps in one sitting and then complain she had a headache from how hard she was working. She said to an employee during an interview, "I'm not supposed to ask, but do you go to church?" She got an inflatable kayak brought into work and blew it up in her office, which is always with its door open facing customers, and started rocking back and forth in it. She would go to customers' houses to do estimates and take Snapchats of the inside of their home, making fun of them. She hosted a very uncomfortable after-work party where she had a bunch of very conservative Christian employees play Cards Against Humanity. She used to only eat cereal for lunch. Once, she poured herself a bowl and started eating, only halfway through did she notice she had poured a bunch of ants in her bowl. You get to act however you want when you're the boss and the owner, I suppose. It sounds like getting fired was for the best. Thanks for watching until the end. If you have a similar story that you'd like to share, please leave it down in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please leave us a like and subscribe. For more videos like this one right now, please stop by our channel. Thanks again, and see you next time.